Hello, everyone. My name is Gilda Ross, and I am the D87 Student and Community Projects Coordinator. This is a topic of interest to so many parents of teenagers, and I am thrilled that you are here joining us today. Thank you so much for the gift of your time. We have an ask at GPS, and that is to have you share the resource. Families everywhere are welcome. There's no registration, there's never any cost. We are here to inspire, we're here to engage, we're here to empower families around the opportunities and the challenges of raising families today. This is a great program with some of my favorite experts in the field. We'll be hearing from Jeff Selingo, who's been with us many times. He'll be talking about this brand new book, Dream School, Finding the College That's Right for You. Many of you know him from his previous book, Who Gets In and Why, A Year Inside College Admissions. And in conversation with him is another one of our favorites, Ron Lieber. This is his book, The Price You Pay for College, an entirely new roadmap for the biggest financial decision your family will ever make. This is the 30th year of the GPS Parent Series. We encourage you to go online and find the links for these programs, the locations for these programs, choose the programs that speak to you, and once again, share. Very quickly, I want to tell you about upcoming events that you won't want to miss. Next week, we'll be continuing on this month on college, and Christopher Willard will be talking about his book, College Mental Health 101. He'll be talking to parents of high school students, elementary students as well, what we need to know about supporting your teens and your child's mental health journey in high school, college, and beyond on the 16th, noon and 7 p.m. And then we're into January, and we'll be talking about happiness with, again, two well-known authors, Gretchen Rubin. She'll be in conversation with Dr. Laurie Santos. Secrets of Adulthood is Gretchen's book, Simple Truths for Greater Happiness, on January 8th. The next week of January, we will be talking to a favorite, Ken Ginsberg. He has a new book called Lighthouse Parenting, talking to parents of children 8 to 18. That's on January 13th, noon and 7 p.m. One more program to make mention of, we'll be talking about empowering athletes, fostering them with confidence for peak performance with Kristen Jones on January 21. And then in this topic of college, we'll also be welcoming Ethan Sawyer around his book about college admission. He's known as the college essay guy. So be sure and circle your calendar. I'm delighted to welcome Denise Dubrovic. She is the Principal Assistant Superintendent of New Trier High School, and she has the honors of the introduction. So Denise, please take it away.
Hello, everyone, and thank you. Thank you so much, Gilda, for welcoming New Trier High School and our community to be part of this incredible programming that you've created through the GPS Parent Series. We really appreciate it, and it's a pleasure to be with everyone today. Today, we're so honored to welcome two of the most respected and influential voices in the national conversation around college admissions and the student experience, Jeff Selingo and Ron Lieber. Jeff Selingo has been writing about colleges and universities over 25 years and is in the New York Times bestselling author of 4 books. His latest book, as Gilda mentioned, Dream School, Find the College That's Right for You, came out in September 2025. It draws on more than 2 years of research and survey of approximately 3,000 parents to provide families with the freedom to think more broadly about what constitutes a good college and the tools necessary to discover their dream school. He's also the author of Who Gets In and Why, A Year Inside College Admissions, which was named one of New York Times 100 notable books of the year in 2020. And of course, Jeff. Jeff spoken numerous times in colleges, businesses, healthcare organizations, and financial service companies, a regular contributor to The Atlantic, The New York Times, and The Wall Street Journal. Jeff serves as a special advisor to the president and professor of practice at Arizona State University. He writes bi-weekly newsletter and next and co-hosts the podcast Future You. Jeff will be in conversation with Ron, as Gilda mentioned, and the author of The Opposite Spoiled: Raising Kids Who Are Grounded, Generous, and Smart About Money, which was an instant New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestseller when it was released in 2015. The Price You Pay for College, an entirely new roadmap for the biggest financial decision your family will ever make, which was followed in 2021. Ron has been the Your Money columnist for the New York Times since 2008. Before coming to the Times, he wrote Green Thumb, personal finance column for the Wall Street Journal. It is such a pleasure to welcome both of you, our distinguished authors and experts, back to GPS Community. Thank you.
Hey, everybody. Denise, thank you so much for that kind introduction. It is great to be back, albeit virtually, with my fellow Chicagoans. Gilda, you are a force of nature. Happy anniversary. Thank you for doing what you do. It is a special honor to get to grill Jeff Selingo here. He and I have, approximately 34.68% overlap in our work. There are a few people who I enjoy talking to more. My copy of Dream School, which I've been carrying around in, sort of a galley pre-publication form for, 9 months, has now been dropped in bathtubs, stepped on, fallen out of my backpack on the subway, and is basically broken from all of the dog ears and the markings. So I'm excited to get at it here. Um, Jeff, you already did a college book. Who gets in and who gets in and why? Which is an absolute must read for anybody in the mix here. Was a special book because you were literally in the room where it happens. Three rooms, in fact, at three pretty different schools. And not only that, you were like all up in the heads of the people doing the happenings in the room. And so, given all that, I guess it made a sort of linear sense that you would want to step outside the room. But like, why'd you do another college book anyway? What was there left to do?
Well, first of all, Ron, I have to get you a real copy of Dream School, so you're not carrying that dog-eared one around. But as you know, galley copies are really special, so I hope you get to keep it. So why did I do it? Well, first of all, I'm thrilled that I did Who Gets It and Why when I did it because, as you probably know, by reporting on colleges and universities right now, it is impossible to get anybody to talk to you about anything. And there is no way. I mean, I had a hard enough time getting into those three offices. As I tell people often, I had to call 24 just to yield three. And today, if I did that, I'd probably yield zero. And I'd probably have to call 50 colleges and universities to do that. So I'm kind of glad I did, as Gilda referred to it, the Yellow Book first. So when I went out and started talking about Who Gets In and Why a couple of years ago, after it came out, after COVID, one of the things that I heard from parents and students and counselors was, well, what if we don't want to play this game, right? What if we're great students, but we're not really Ivy plus material or highly selective material, whatever, or highly ranked material, whatever term you want to use. What if we can't get in, which is more likely, given the ultra low, highly rejective rates, or the highly rejective rates, ultra low acceptance rates that these colleges have? And I promised Akil that I'll pay him $5 for using that term. Akil Bello, who has uses this term highly rejective because that's what these colleges really are. We talk about their low acceptance rate. They really have high rejection rates. And then the third piece was, what if we can't afford it? And then Ron, this is right in your wheelhouse, right? We know that the best merit aid is at colleges deeper in the rankings. And so I wanted to write a book that looks at those types of schools, which are the vast majority of colleges and universities out there, for the vast majority of students. And because what ends up happening is, if you're thinking that universe is anywhere from 12 to 1,400 schools, those are four-year colleges and universities that are comprehensive, that have over 1,000 students. That's a big universe of institutions. And most people then run to the rankings because they don't know how to make sense of that world. And I wanted to make sense of that world. So the book really looks at, first of all, looks at why you should look beyond just the elites. The elites are great schools. I'm not here to denigrate them in any way and say don't apply to them. But the first part of the book talks about the myths around the elites. Then it looks at what you should be looking for in a good college. And then at the very end, I have a list of what I'm calling 75 new dream schools. These are places that are both excellent and accessible to get in.
Gotcha. Um, so uh, know your audience. You know your audience pretty well. Also, don't insult your audience. That was advice that I got from a Wall Street Journal editor many years ago, when there was something cheeky in a column that was, in fact, inappropriate. Very early on in the book, you describe me, and I think maybe you a little bit, and a whole bunch of your readers, as being part of this thing that you describe as the panicking class. I don't think you coined that phrase. I think it
No,
came
I
from
didn't.
Jake
No.
Hang.
Yeah.
But I felt very much seen, not insulted, because I try to be emotionally intelligent about myself and my parenting. But I imagine some people did not necessarily recognize themselves as panickers, and yet they probably
They
should.
are. Yeah.
Why did that phrase resonate with you, and what does it mean in this context of approaching the college search?
It resonated with me because I live in, the suburbs of DC, which is, central casting for the panicking class, as are the suburbs of Chicago and New York and San Francisco and basically every major metropolitan area. And it resonated with me because we're of a generation, Ron, Gen Xers, who went to college in an era when it still cost a lot of money, no doubt about it, but it seemed achievable for a broader range of families, including, by the way, my parents, my mother, who didn't go to college, who, by the way, turns 90 today, and I'm visiting her here in Pennsylvania. So happy birthday, Mom. I know she's not watching, but happy birthday. And then my father, who was a high school music teacher, and they were able to send three kids to college, three kids to graduate school. And that is much more difficult today. When I tell college officials that affordability is a real issue, they say, oh, there's just perception of affordability. No, affordability is a real issue, by the way, at every level, including, by the way, as we saw in my survey and we see in other surveys, among this panicking class who often have the privilege of having enough money to actually pay for college, but deciding, is this really where I want to spend my money? I have to take care of aging parents. I have other kids. I want to retire myself one day. And so I think what's happened in the generation between the Gen X and the Gen Zers is that we now have a class of parents who are worried about their own financial sustainability, but more than that, the value of college given its cost. And second, we all know in our own careers, because many of us are now in our 40s and 50s, that the job market has changed so much, and there seems to be fewer pathways into jobs. And so the stakes just seem so much higher now than they did 30 years ago. So I think those two things, the money and the career stuff, combine into making this a high stakes decision in a way that it never seemed to be before.
That's interesting. So you didn't mention declining admissions odds at highly rejective schools as being part of the panicking. You find that to be tertiary, or do you think
Well,
those
I
of
find it to be
people?
yeah, no,
Yeah.
I definitely find it to be piece of it because what we then tend to think because of those two things, because we're panicking about value and money and we're panicking about careers, we tend to think that a degree from a highly selective college is insurance against those two things, right? In other words, it's a highly valuable, so we'll pay whatever we want for or whatever we can for it, or we will pay full price for it. And it's insurance in a job market that seems incredibly unstable.
Gotcha. I think it's fascinating that some of the administrators that you talk to think that affordability is a perception problem. You know who else has been talking a lot about affordability being a perception problem recently?
Our president.
Donald Trump.
Exactly.
Saying.
It's it's the same thing. I mean, and you see this on social media. It's not only the college leaders, but it's the people who do research in higher ed who keep talking about, well, college prices. Like it really does remind me what's happening in a larger economy. You can say college prices are flat or falling wherever they are, but it's like the price of eggs. When you go to buy them and they seem more expensive or they are more expensive than they were yesterday, and that is the price of college. We know this from work that Phil Levine at Wellesley has done, that the net price of college at every income level has gone up since the 1990s. So I don't care what you say about how inflation of college prices has slowed down, it still is expensive.
Yeah, and perception or the data aside, right? If there is a perception problem in the marketplace, to blame the consumer in that marketplace, when you are pulling the levers in an industry where the thing costs six figures and you're not allowed to know what your price is going to be until after you've paid money to apply to see if you can buy the product, I find that problematic. But let's not just address the misperceptions of the people on the other side of the table. One of the things that I found most difficult about running the gauntlet with my 20-year-old was that I was trying very hard throughout the process and when I was reporting the price you pay for college, but particularly when I was parenting through this, was to have a deep level of humility, even as a quasi-expert, about what I did not know anymore about these places and about the process, because things have changed pretty dramatically since you and I ran the gauntlet, in the late 80s or early 90s. And one of the things that I saw throughout your book sprinkled were these kind of nods and notions that parents have the wrong idea about all sorts of stuff, even if they mean well. And I just want to walk you through some of those things. But I guess for starters, right, one of the things that hangs over this is a kind of nostalgia for parents who went to college themselves. There's an effort to sort of recreate whatever sort of quasi-utopian, experience they had themselves, or their fuzzy memory of it that has perhaps been enhanced. Is
And
nostalgia
Ron,
a problem?
I don't mean to interrupt you there, but I think that's an important point because, as you know, because I think we're both on a crusade to make parents better consumers in this process. As you know, then that influences, biases them from becoming good consumers because colleges know that this is an emotional good that they're buying. Because how many of us still advertise something we bought at the age of 18 by still wearing sweatshirts and swag and putting up flags outside of our house and everything else for college? And so colleges know that. And so when your kids go through the process, they pull at those emotional heartstrings. They tug at those emotional heartstrings, which, as you know, Ron, in any sort of consumer good that you're buying, as soon as that happens, you're going to make bad decisions.
Yeah, totally. So let's tick some of these off, right? We're not supposed to use the phrase safety school anymore, but I kept using it. Why do college counselors want us to stop using that phrase? And what has changed about the definition or even the mere existence of safety schools?
They don't want to use that phrase, although parents, I think, still use it, is because there is no such thing as a safety school anymore. In fact, you will see, so often now they're called likely schools because of something that has really come on in the last 20 years, and that is yield management. And so what's ended up happening is that because so many students are applying to so many more schools than they did 20 years ago. So 4 million applications filed in 2001, 14 million college applications filed in 2023, basically for a senior class that maybe is about 800,000 students larger, or 800,000 graduates larger, because students are, instead of applying to 3 or 4 schools, they're now applying to 8, 9, 10, 12, 14 schools. We all know you can apply to as many schools as you want, essentially, but you could only go to one. You could even get into, multiple schools, but you can only go to one. Everybody wants to be that one. That's the yield. Everybody's yield, except for the most selective colleges, has collapsed. And I mean collapsed, right? Back in 2001, I have a chart in my book. Basically, almost most colleges were around 40% in some way. 40% of students who were accepted ended up going. Now, why is yield important to you as an applicant? Because when every college wants to have their yield as high as possible, because otherwise it's a pretty inefficient system. You're accepting all these students who end up not coming. And by the way, every student you accept, your acceptance rate goes up. And we sometimes equate, although I don't think we should, we equate acceptance rate with quality. And so everybody wants to keep their acceptance rate low because that helps them in the perception market. So what happens with yield as a result? And so what's happening is that colleges and universities are really trying to guess and it's really a guess. They use data, but it's still at the end of the day a guess. If I accept this student, are they really going to come? And they look at all these clues. One of the clues they look at is your academic profile higher than our normal academic profile? And if it is, they think they're being used as a safety school. And they probably are, by the way, but now it's your safety school, and now they're denying you because they don't think they're going to yield you, which really kind of really blows up this idea of a safety school. And in fact, when I was at Davidson, which was one of the colleges and universities in Who Gets In and Why, they even had a code for this during the admissions process, during the reading process, called LTE, likelihood to enroll. And they would rate applicants on this, and they would talk about this, how many students from this high school have applied to Davidson before? Have they come to visit? There's all these like little clues they look for in their data to see if this student is likely to enroll. And if they don't think they are, and they're on the bubble anyway, they'll get a denial because they would rather deny that student than accept them and have that student deny them.
Yeah. And I guess to sort of take it to the inverse, what does it actually take to get into a highly rejective school these days, and how has that changed?
There is no formula, as you know, Ron. Everybody wants a formula. Everybody wants certainty, and there is no certainty. I did a program in Denver for this book for Dream School a couple of months ago, right when the book came out. And at the end of the talk, during the Q&A, a parent came up to the microphone and said, my daughter wants to go to Stanford. And then she started to lay out all the things that her daughter was doing. So the question to me was, do you think she should take another AP course? Do you think she should join another club? What else can she do to get in? Because we do think it's a formula. And colleges use this, it's really a euphemism to allow them to really do whatever they want in the admissions process, called holistic admissions. But it truly is holistic. There's not one thing that's going to get you over the finish line. But at the end of the day, what does get you in? Hooks still matter. We know that. Athletics really helps, even at the highly selective universities. We know that. But what's interesting to me is that I did a story with Christoph Gutentag, who used to be the Dean of Admissions at Duke last year. And he told me something that really shocked me, Ron, because I think this will really put this all in perspective. He said 10 years ago, he said, we used to have this phrase about a wall of fives at Duke, meaning fives on AP tests. And he said, and I said, what does a wall of fives mean? He said, well, 8, 9, 10 fives, meaning 8 or 9 or 10 AP tests, all with fives. And as we know, there's a lot of high schools in America that don't even offer that many AP courses. So he said, and this is what really surprised me, he said, that doesn't even move the needle today at Duke. So I said, what does? And he said, you have to really go beyond the high school curriculum, meaning, going outside of high school, taking college courses at your local college, but doing research in high school, really doing those things that have become memes in some way on social media, but starting a new, club that saves the world. Like, it really is, in some cases, extraordinary. And even that sometimes doesn't get you in. Now, we also all know of students who didn't do all that and still got in. And so this is why, at the end of the day, this is a lottery. And I'm not encouraging people not to do it if that's the game they want to play. I think you should try. It's worth it. It's worth it because it is a lottery in some ways, but you need to have a backup plan. And that's really what Dream School puts out there.
Yeah. Gotcha. Let's talk about good old State University. One of the pieces of data in your book, I was vaguely aware of this trend, but it sort of blew my mind when I saw the statistic. At flagship state universities, so we're talking about, the Champaign-Urbanas, the Bloomingtons, the Madtowns, the Iowa cities, right? 4 out of 10 undergraduates at those flagship universities are from someplace else outside the state. That's insane. How did that happen? And why leave in the first place if you've got I mean, look, we know that Illinois is a fiscal basket case and that and going to Champaign for 4 years and paying full freight may cost you 150 grand or more now, but that's still a lot less than going to Northwestern. So what gives here?
So a couple of things happened. One is that it really started in when I was actually a state reporter at the Chronicle of Higher Education. So I started covering this trend. And in 2001, states were killed by that recession, and they really made deep cuts to higher ed. And,
Yeah.
and and there was only so many things that colleges and universities, public colleges and universities could do. One of them is they could increase tuition for in-state students, but they could only go so far on that because they would hear from their constituents. But they had this really easy thing to do, which was to take out of state students. And it was perfectly timed because that's when millennial students, this huge millennial class of students, was coming through the college pipeline. And most of those students were applying to the highly rejectives, but those places were not increasing the size of their freshman class. And so you had all these talented students looking for a place to go, and they started to apply to public institutions elsewhere, these big brand names, the Illinois, the Michigans, the Wisconsins. And at that same time, colleges and universities, those public colleges and universities in the South grew particularly. They had plenty of room to grow. And places like Alabama decided, we don't have a lot of in-state students who we feel are qualified for Alabama. We have all this money, and let's start taking some money to use merit aid, essentially what private colleges were doing. And maybe we'll give them a $10,000 or $15,000 scholarship to grab them. We're still getting more money because on average they're paying twice as much as out of state to go to an out of state public. So they started just to grab these out of state people everywhere. And so it turned into what I would describe in the book as this great student swap, where essentially kids were closed out of their in-state public flagship, if they even applied. Sometimes they didn't even apply, to just go to an out-of-state public flagship. I see this all the time in my backyard in Maryland, where students are going to another Big Ten university, usually Michigan or Wisconsin or Illinois, Ohio State. And often I say, did you even apply to the University of Maryland? Sometimes they haven't, but sometimes they have and they've been closed out. And so they have to go somewhere else to pay twice as much. And they're also going south. This has been in a lot of articles over the last couple of months. And they're going south because the South is still growing. The South was open largely during COVID. People saw that on social media when these kids who are now graduating were in middle school and high school. And even if you're paying twice as much out of state, if you're not getting a lot of merit aid at a private, it's still a pretty good deal to go out of state to a public.
Yeah, so this is still a thing that I think people in the North are having trouble getting their heads around. Look, when I was a Chicago kid in the late 80s, not a single person in my Francis Parker class applied to a single Southern school, not even Duke, not Emory, no place. Definitely not Texas, the University of Alabama. I mean, no way, right?
Mississippi, like Ole Miss.
Yeah,
Like,
right. You had this incredible Ole Miss example in your
yeah.
book. And the reason why was, kids from up here are not going to be happy, welcome, accommodated, included down there. It was almost as like the culture was somehow different or anathema to kids from the North. Now the migration has gotten so big that the Illinois legislature had to create this slush fund to like buy all the kids back to Champaign who were going to Alabama. It's nuts. But are they happy when they do that?
So there's one, it's a great question. I'm in a lot of Facebook groups as you are. I think there's a lot of parents who talk about their kids not being thrilled once they get there. It's pretty far for a lot of these kids. It's a very different culture from the North. And if you can't find your people, it's hard. It's easier, I think. The example you talked in the book is a girl from Pennsylvania who ended up at Ole Miss, who also declined acceptances, shockingly, to two other Southern privates, Rice and Vanderbilt. but she got to Ole Miss on a full ride, was in the honors program, did study abroad, did undergraduate research, all paid for. That makes this a little bit easier, I think, when you're getting that amount of aid. But here's the other thing that I think parents and families forget, and I point this out in chapter 2 of the book, as you know, is that most hiring is still regional in nature. And
Mm.
so, we looked at the data from Lightcast, for example, which follows students from college into their first jobs. If you go to school in the Southeast, it's not doesn't mean you can't get a job back in Chicago or New York or somewhere else, but you're more likely to then work in the Southeast, in Atlanta or some other, Nashville or wherever. Now, maybe if that's what you want, great. But I always often talk to these families, oh yeah, I don't really care if my kid goes there because they're going to come back, quote unquote. They may not. And it's a question that especially if your kid wants to do that, that you should definitely have a discussion about.
Yeah, something else that I think very few parents think through, even if everybody in the household is open-minded about going far away or to the south, the kids especially. All right, so let's talk about merit aid, merit scholarships. Barely existed, certainly wasn't as widespread when today's parents were running the gauntlet. Now, I mean, I don't even know the right analogy to use, but as a Midwestern boy, I grew up with the Land's End catalog coming over the transom. Now the Land's End catalog comes over the transom, and everything is permanently 35% off. And it's like, what world are we living in here? But the fact of the matter is, as I've written, as you have written, there are a lot of really great schools where, like, basically nobody's paying full price except the
Like three
desperate
people.
and people from outside of the United States.
Yeah.
Um, uh, just how widespread is that? And on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the most knowledgeable, what's the level of ignorance on average in in an everyday upper middle class community that you encounter?
The level of ignorance is shockingly high. Which, by the way, just a shout out to Ron Lieber's class on merit aid, because it's a class that everyone should take to figure out how this process works. Because, as you said, Ron, most of us went to college when financial aid was a thing that colleges gave out to students who filled out some sort of financial aid form. This was even the precursor to the FAFSA, and needed financial aid, right? It was need based largely. There was some merit based, but it was not as large as it is today. Now merit based aid is basically almost everywhere, except for the most highly selected places that don't really discount. And when I talk to parents and they see kids in their neighborhood going to these schools, so I'll give a real life example here. There's a flag on a house not far from where I live in suburban DC for Santa Clara University in California. And one of my neighbors was commenting, wow, like how does somebody from here go all the way out to Santa Clara? I never even heard of Santa Clara. Which I also find shocking, like how we often think of colleges the way they were back in the late 80s, early 90s. And I was showing them some stuff from the Common Data Set, which really shows you kind of what kind of merit aid these institutions are giving out. And I had to walk through this process with this parent who, by the way, had a senior in high school and was going through the college process themselves and had no idea that there is this trade-off because they were so focused on brand name. Had no idea that there was this trade-off. He said, "Wait a second, you're telling me I could get like a $15,000 or $20,000 off if my kid just applies to a college, maybe a little bit deeper in the rankings?" And I said, "Yes." And so it is shockingly high. And I think what's happening here, Ron, is because when you're so focused on brand name and the rankings, and you're only looking at the top, those are places that largely don't play this game. But you don't have to go very far down. I hate to use the rankings and say the words far down, but you don't have to go very far down, as you well know, to start really getting real discounts.
Yeah, gotcha. Um, so along those lines, you created and this was years ago, but you actually like put it down in print in the book and then have made it available for free to people who are now passing it around all the time. This list of buyer schools and seller schools, which has something to do, a fair bit to do with merit aid,
Yeah.
but is also more of like a cosmic sense reflecting a cosmic understanding that um, schools are actually in radically different positions in the marketplace for the upper middle class in particular, right? And some of them are going to discount more and some of them are going to discount less. And you can sort of tease out who is who, but you made it quite specific. So will you tell us about what that is exactly, where people can find your list, and
Yep.
also whether any schools have been mad about being included or about being excluded?
I don't think they're mad. They don't love the term buyer and seller, right? So buyers are the vast majority of colleges and universities that literally have to buy some students every year to fill their classes. As I say in the book, it has nothing to do with the quality of the undergraduate education. There's just, there's so many seats and there's not enough students to fill all of them all the time. And so they do have to do what every other American retailer has to do, which is discount their product a little bit to get people in the door. The sellers are the very small number of institutions, usually at the very top of the rankings, that mostly give out their financial aid based on financial need. And so I think people don't love the word buyer, but they're not mad that they're on there. And the reason why I put this list together, Ron, is because you made a reference to something very early on that I think is important, in that you apply to college without knowing how much you're going to pay. You get accepted to college without knowing how much you're going to get to pay. You usually find out, either with your acceptance letter or soon after, what you're going to pay. And what I found in reporting who gets in and why is that in April, these students would come into their counselor, their high school counselor, and would celebrate that they got into these pretty highly selective colleges, but they got zero aid because they lived in, the suburbs of Chicago, the suburbs of DC, and other places. And most of the aid at those colleges, while generous for financial need, are largely given out for financial need. And their parents didn't want to pay what is now, as you have pointed out in one of your articles, closing in on $100,000 a year for 4 years. And so in April, it's too late to apply to buyer and seller schools, although you could still probably apply to some buyers even in April. But I wanted to kind of move the financial conversation up earlier. And I think the campaign that you're on to basically find out what you're going to pay before you even apply, I think is critically important. We're not probably going to get there anytime soon, but if we, in the meantime, I think understanding what schools are big buyers in terms of giving out money, I think is important in the fall when you're applying and not in April when it's too late to apply. And by the way, you could get that jeffselingo.com. You could get that list of buyers and sellers. It's a guide. It's not meant to be really that specific. You're supposed to use it just to guide you through that process.
Yeah, I'll bet there are parents of ninth graders and 10th graders on this call who are probably feeling sheepish, and probably have college counselors saying, don't worry about it. It's too soon. Leave me alone. Don't pester me. They're wrong. You're right.
Yep.
You've got to figure out which colleges are financially sensible for you, before you spend a bunch of money and time trying to visit, right? Because if you go and shop a bunch of places that it turns out aren't going to be right for you, then you wasted your time. And Jeff's lists can serve as a sort of, preliminary shopping guide as you begin to sort of figure this out. So Jeff, you are a relatively even-keeled dude. You don't throw enormous punches that often, but there were some really good roundhouses in this book, and they have to do with things that I think people think are true that may not be completely true. So let's start with like what is life is really like at some of these elite colleges. I think a lot of parents assume that like, well, once you get there, it's all, sort of roses and enormous endowments and, kind of lavish parties and yellow brick road stuff. Here's how you described some of these institutions. The knives out culture that pervades elite colleges can make friendships feel transactional. Ow! How do you know that's true?
So I spent a lot of time with, undergraduates there right now. I didn't go to a highly selective college, but even if I did back in the day, I have a feeling from talking to graduates, of our generation that it wasn't as competitive as it is today. And I'm not saying this is true of every student at every highly selective college, but one of the things I've heard a lot, just even in the last week, is just how hard it is to get into clubs, for example, at these highly selective colleges. And in fact, William, one of the students I interviewed, one of the characters in the book, he's in the introduction, went to Columbia. The things he talks about is one is can't get into clubs. It's hard to get into clubs at some of these places as it is to actually get into the college. You can't get into some courses. There's a waiting list. A number of students talk to me about the waiting list for some courses compared to their friends at other schools who didn't have to wait. Ability to do research. William really wanted to do undergraduate research, and at a place like Columbia, where some professors only cared about graduate students, he didn't really have that option. So it's just this idea that we trade in the competitiveness to get into these colleges now to the competitiveness to get through them and to the other side. And often, by the way, as we know, especially at some of these places, the competition to get a small slice of jobs, usually in consulting or in the big banks, right? I think a number of people pointed out that at places like Harvard and others in Dartmouth, I think a third of the senior class now are just going to Wall Street and the consultancies. Now that might change because I think the job market is changing, particularly in the consulting companies, but there is this knives out culture as a result.
Yeah. All right. Something else that I think is implanted in the brain of parents of a certain age like me. Nobody ever told me that I could hack the system, at Kennedy King, for 2 years or at Oakton Community College. We might have saved a lot of money. I was on financial aid. Could have worked, right?
Yep.
Didn't occur to me. Nobody told me about it. In some parts of the country, like California, this is a hack that's embraced and celebrated, especially because you need like a 6.2 GPA just to get into like UC Santa Barbara now, right? So people go to community college, they shoot the lights out, they make great connections with really dedicated teachers, and then they make the transfer. And it works in a lot of ways, has some downsides. But Jeff, are people embracing this, or are people still all sort of elitist and snobbish about it?
I think they're a little elitist and snobbish about it. I think there is an idea that they want the usual 4 year, the traditional 4 year undergraduate college experience. And by going to a community college for 2 years, you kind of lose out on that. I don't think they also really know the good pathways from community college to 4 year colleges. At some places, it's really well defined. Florida does this really well. For example, in Orlando with the University of Central Florida, in Northern Virginia, near where I live, with Northern Virginia Community College and George Mason University. In fact, when you go to Northern Virginia Community College and get into their direct admit program, as long as you have a certain GPA, all of your courses will transfer. And by the way, when you walk into Northern Virginia Community College, you also get an ID for George Mason. So you feel like a George Mason student as a result. Those types of programs are few and far between. And what more likely happens, Ron, is as we know from data from Columbia University's Community College Research Center, and I don't have these numbers right off the top of my head, but there's something like 60 something percent of students who go to community colleges want to earn a 4 year degree eventually. Something like 28% actually transfer to a 4 year college, and something like 15% actually get a 4 year degree. This is why
Within 6 years,
yeah,
within 6 or 8 years.
within six
Yeah.
years. Yeah. So this is why this pathway I like, but I highly encourage people to really do the research up front to make sure that you're going to a community college for the right reasons, to make sure that the courses that you're going to take there will largely transfer to where you eventually will be able to get in. And by the way, will you be able to get in? Is there a good transfer partner with that community college? So all of these things I think come together. Otherwise, what you're going to be stuck with are a ton of credits and nowhere to go.
Yeah. I mean, basically, you have to have really high executive functioning skills and a long blueprint that you follow to a T almost on a weekly basis, to make sure that you're doing it right. All right. One more thing that's much different now from before, and you touched on some of it, and then we'll go to Q&A. I, I, I don't have a catchphrase for this yet, but it feels like there's been a sort of decline and fall of the undecided in this culture among 18 to 22-year-olds. There's all this pressure to, declare upfront, that you're going to go into this or that professional school and you're deciding this at the age of 17. As you mentioned in the book, Jeff, what one of the backdoor kind of improve your odds at Case Western in Cleveland is declare yourself, a humanities kid. People are sort of working the angles here. But nobody's supposed to know what they are, who they are, let alone what they want to be when they're 17 years old. This is madness. And yet it feels like we're sort of, the process is almost set up to disadvantage kids who quite rightly don't know what they want to do because they do not know who they are, and nor should they. I feel like I was embraced as an undecided. I think you
Well,
probably
you also went to a liberal arts college, which I think still does embrace the
fair,
undecided. Yeah.
fair. So is it really, big school, small school? And if you're undecided, don't go big?
I wouldn't say don't go big, but there are a couple of disadvantages to going big. One of them is if you want to get into certain programs, it's really hard. Often at these big publics, particularly and other big privates, some business programs, some STEM majors, you have to declare coming in and they're capacity controlled. So it's very difficult to transfer in later. And by the way, they're so stacked with requirements, you may not graduate in 4 years. So it's just something to know more than anything. Second, internships we know are critically important. You have to start lining a lot of that stuff up, sophomore year, junior year, even earlier. And if you really don't declare your major until sophomore year, a little bit more difficult. The bigger thing, though, Ron, is around making at a bigger place. A lot of stuff happens around the school within the university or the major. And I saw this in the data, as you know, in the book. I was able to get data from the National Survey of Student Engagement, which is one of my favorite surveys about how engaged students are. And they do measure engagement by major. And some of the least engaged people are undecideds. Now, that doesn't mean I'm not trying to discourage people from undecided. By the way, I have a 16-year-old at home who's very undecided. I think it's all fine. I think it's great, actually. But how then does that school make those undecided students feel like they're part of something? Do they have some sort of program? Do they have some sort of scaffolding? Do they have some sort of guide rails to help those students make the transition into college, explore, eventually find a major? Like those are things that if I were going to look for a college, I would ask. I often ask this question when I'm on tours. What if you're undecided? How does it feel as an incoming student compared to somebody with a major? I think it's a great question to ask, and you get a sense then. And they would say, you just take what I take, and maybe you get an advisor, who knows what they're doing. Like that to me is not great. I want to know that I'm coming in, there's something structured, there's good advising to help me eventually find my major, make sure my credits are going to transfer, all that stuff.
Gotcha. Q&A time. Gilda, how do we want to do this?
Yeah, that sounds great. Well, we're just going to dive right in then. Ron, you can be looking at the chats. Denise and I have a question. We're going to send, if you're a guidance counselor, a school counselor, and you want a copy of this book, email me and we'll make sure that you get a copy. As a school counselor, I do want to reassure you, we're starting this conversation early. I want to tell you that it's because we listen to your advice. I've heard a Jeff talk often about get out there, look at the college that's in your backyard. Even though you may not be going to it, get a sense of what's there, the feeling of the place. I've heard Jeff and you both talk about let's not make our children crazy by talking about this 24/7, 365. Maybe schedule a Sunday night. Let's prioritize family time and other conversations. I think your story about William is critical. And Jeff, will you please tell us the story of William?
Yes. So the story of William is the in the introduction of the book, which by the way you could uh, sample for free on Amazon. So William, I met pretty early on in the reporting for the book from Minnesota. He applied early decision. The fascinating thing, and I think this is one of the issues with early decision, Ron and I are not huge fans, is that, a week before early decision, he was trying to debate between Northwestern, Stanford, and Columbia. Three pretty different places. Some people say, well, they're all big research universities. Yeah, okay. But they're three pretty different places. And he picked Columbia because he thought it would be the easiest to get into early decision. He gets in, and then he shows up, and a couple of things quickly happen. He can't get into this. There's a particular class he wants, and his advisor said, yeah, you're not going to get into that maybe junior or senior year because of the waiting list. He grew up in the shadow of University of Minnesota, Twin Cities. He was actually able to do research in high school there, and he thought he would be able to do research with a professor that he particularly wanted to at Columbia. Professor says, basically, I don't work with undergraduates. He talked about the core curriculum at Columbia as just not being really that fun, and everybody just wanted to race through it in the effort to get to their major. And so they really didn't discuss the great books and discuss all these things that they should be discussing as incoming students. Nobody really had fun in New York because again, it was that knives out culture where everybody was competing to get into the right clubs, within 6 weeks of showing up on campus. He really hated it in so many ways and went home, asked his mom to transfer, ends up transferring to the University of Minnesota. But what's interesting about all those things, Gilda, that he found wrong about Columbia, every single thing he could have probably discovered during the search. And I asked him that question, and he said, yes, but I was blinded by prestige. He really was just focused on the most prestigious colleges and universities without asking himself, what do I want out of this process? He knew he wanted to do undergraduate research. That was a big question on his list. So why wouldn't he ask at every single college that he was going to apply to, how easy is it to do undergraduate research here? Can I actually do it with this professor? He knew he wanted to do it with a particular professor. He never even asked that question. And that to me goes back to this idea of if we start the college search by just starting to put names on a list without asking ourselves, what do we really want in college? We are going to have a mismatch because all we're going to look at are those top colleges.
On page 247, why did you give us this appendix list?
Because my publisher wanted it. No, I'm no, because I think it's funny. Uh, I always tell people when they pick up the book, don't go to the back of the book, to the appendix, and that's the first thing they do. It is a list, and I found I was giving people a lot of advice, a lot of data, a lot of things to look at. Sometimes people just want the answer, and these colleges are not the answer. There's more than I've called them the 75 new dream schools. There's actually could be many more colleges on this list. We had to cut it off somewhere. I also made it geographically diverse. So there's some colleges that really should be on the list, but they're not because I don't want all the schools in the Northeast or in the Midwest to be on there. But I really wanted to give examples of public and private institutions that are both accessible, meaning they don't have ultra low acceptance rates, and they do really well on a lot of measures. They're not perfect, by the way. That's the other thing, Gilda, that I think we are always looking for this perfect fit. I hear this so often. The dream school, which goes back to the title, right? My dream school is a perfect fit for me. There is no such thing as a perfect fit. There's a problem with every single college and university out there in terms of how you're going to fit in there and how you're going to succeed there. What we're looking for is a good fit. We're looking for the best we can get. What do we want out of this process, and how much could these colleges give us in that process? And I think many of these schools, now I will tell you, this just goes back to Ron's earlier question about the panicking class. When I give this list out in my neighborhood or I show it to my friends in my neighborhood, I will tell you they they raise their eyebrows at some of the schools on the list. Well, I will never send my kid to fill in the blank. And it's unfortunate because some of these places, they're really good. And their kids will really do well there and will really succeed. But do you want to know what they're looking at? They're looking at the acceptance rate. Oh, if these places accept 50, 60, 70% of students, they must not be very good. And we really need to stop equating quality or acceptance rates with quality.
In other words, dream school, it doesn't exist,
Dream
perhaps.
school, and I say that very upfront. The title is provocative on purpose because it sells books, but it is the idea that there is no single dream school. The dream in dream school is how do you like to learn? Where are you going to thrive? Where are you going to find your people? I love Ron's lines about kinship, right? College is around finding those people, as he often says, who are going to stand up at your wedding and carry your casket. I always remember the second part and not the first part, but today I did remember both parts. But that's what you're looking for, and you're going to find those at a broader range of colleges. And I will argue you're going to find those at places where there is not this knives out culture. And again, I get it; it's not true at every single selective college, and not true among all students at selective colleges. But it's something you should look out for.
Denise has a question, but I'm going to take Natalie's first, Denise, okay? When families get caught up in name schools, what is the one piece of advice you would offer to help them focus on fit? How can counselors and educators help shift the conversation away from prestige and toward what truly matters?
So one piece of advice that I like to give out is when we're putting together our list, and we have three buckets: a likely bucket, a target bucket, and a reach bucket. We often what ends up happening is when we do go on tours. I often find people starting at their reach schools, right? They're going to look at the Harvards and the Stanfords and the Amherst and the Williamses, right? That's where they start their tours. I actually want them to flip that script. I would actually like them to tour their likely schools first. And why is that? Two reasons. One is they're more likely to get into those schools and go to those schools anyway. So why don't you go see them now? You might be really surprised. Those likely schools might become your favorites if you go visit them first. But more than that, you then can see what those likely schools are like for when you do go to those reach schools. And instead of comparing the likely to the reaches, you're comparing the reaches to the likelies.
Denise, you're up.
Yes, so this has been great. Thank you both so much for this discussion. So, one of the things we've been talking about at New Trier is what are the career exposure to careers and real world experiences, so that our students should have, so they can understand and know possibly what they might want to major in, since so many schools make them declare. So in your view, what role should high schools play in offering students exposure to different careers and real world experiences so they can begin to understand their interests and maybe potential future pathways?
This is a great question. I did an event at the 92nd Street Y in New York last Monday with David Muir of ABC News, who was my college roommate, and he joked about this because he started interning at a TV station in Syracuse, New York, at the seventh grade. He's not suggesting everybody start in seventh grade, but he talked a lot about trying to get exposure to careers earlier than college. Interning in high school, I think, is quote unquote difficult, if not impossible. But we need to go beyond what we see in our own communities to really see what jobs are like. I often hear this from students. They don't really even know most of the jobs that exist out there. Even when they do, they don't really know what they're like. I remember for one of my books talking to an architecture student who didn't get to intern until the summer before his senior year. And then he really thought, oh, this is what the job is like. I don't really want to do this. And he ended up not pursuing architecture as a result. Well, he could have actually job shadowed maybe much earlier, maybe even in high school, to understand what the job was really like. And also we close off careers because people never see them because they don't exist in their community necessarily. So what I would love to do is more. Can we do more job shadowing in high school to get a sense of that? Can we open up high school students to more careers than what they might see in their local community? Those are
Yeah,
things that I would like to see.
yeah, and uh, just to go harder on one thing that Jeff nodded to with a certain amount of skepticism. Denise, I have no doubt that you've got all sorts of people in the panicking class. I know the Nutria crowd well. All sorts of people in the panicking class beating down your door to start elaborate internship programs. Um, I have witnessed the attempt to define internship down to the early teenage years. in part because people think it will help them get their kids into college. It won't. The admissions officers laugh at this. If it has anything to do with college admissions, it's a profound waste of time. If it has something to do with exposure, this is a good thing, right? But you're not all that useful as a 16-year-old intern in just about every industry on the planet. And, it might make more sense to try to get a paid job, in an industry that's of interest, as like some kind of a grunt. But I really love the shadowing thing. And I want to mention just one thing about that, because I had a conversation recently with John Katzman, the founder of the Princeton Review. He's no longer associated with that organization and has started a number of companies and invested a whole bunch of more all around this space, right? And he's parented a couple kids who are in their 20s. That dude knows a lot about a lot. And he said something to me that blew my mind. He said only 7 times in his 30-some year career does he remember getting an incredibly thoughtful note from a high school student or an undergrad saying precisely what they were interested in, and then making some kind of mild to moderate ask of John. He said only 7 times. Like, John Katzman is like a genius, he's like a seriously incredible entrepreneur. I couldn't believe that only 7 kids had gotten in touch with him. He said he hired 6 of them full time eventually, right? So what's the moral of that story? We need to be teaching teenagers how to ask for things. I have a very highly competent 20-year-old. She has a really hard time composing a note to a grown-up asking for stuff. But it's okay to ask for stuff. People want to throw the rope back. And one of the best things we can be doing for 16-year-olds is to teach them how to ask for things of grown-ups and to teach them what to ask for that's reasonable, which might well include, hey, can I just like come downtown on Friday when we have the school off, with the school day off, or maybe Denise is giving everybody the day off so everybody can go downtown and like shadow somebody for a day and just kind of see what that's like. I wish more kids knew how to do that. I wish my kid knew how to do it. I'm still teaching her.
As you're seeing a shift in, as we widen the lens, seeing a shift in that. We're also seeing a shift in the way schools are approaching this. You're going to see rollout at lots of different places about understanding this, why before where, looking deeper at interests and so on, and helping all students. So I'm excited about that. As we're closing, I'm going to ask Ron, I'm going to ask Jeff one last question. Maybe this is the one question that you get most often, or maybe you want to leave us with your heartfelt words to the many counselors, school administrators, parents, and some students that are listening today.
Who wants to start? Ron?
Go ahead, Jeff.
Okay. I want to bring high school back to being about high school and not being a playground for getting into college, and not even a playground, kind of a gauntlet for getting into college. And I think what's ended up happening, and particularly with the rise of early decision, it really moves the senior year college search now into the junior year. That means everything that used to be done in the junior year is now done in the sophomore year. And so now we have 8th and 9th graders really worried about getting into college. We know from experts that the teenage brain is developing at a rapid pace throughout high school. What you think in 1 month, it totally changes in the next month. And it goes back to what, Gilda, I said earlier about that parent who really had an influence on me, who asked about my kid wants to get into Stanford, what else can they do? And as I often tell that parent, as I tell my own kids, what do you want to do? Like, let's stop thinking about what we do for an anonymous admissions officer, all of whom, by the way, are terrific people, but have impossible decisions to make sometime. Let's stop thinking about what we're going to do for them when they're going to read your application on a random Wednesday in December or January and read it in 7 to 9 minutes and make a decision often on their ground, like on what they need, not what you need. And if you're doing it for them, you're going to be disappointed if you don't get in. But if you don't get in, but you did everything that you did because you wanted to do it, because it was exciting to you, it challenged you, then you're still going to be disappointed by the decision, but you're at least going to be happy with what you did.
Yeah, I was going to say one thing, but now I'm going to add something else in response to what Jeff said. The thing that I wanted to say was just to ask questions, ask better questions, and ask more questions politely. I feel like so many of us act as if we're supplicants in this process instead of applicants. And I want people to have a much healthier sense of entitlement to information as they shop. I don't mean that in the, entitlement sense where, we might think our kids are becoming entitled in the household, when it comes to their behavior. We are consumers in a marketplace. This stuff is expensive. It is, in fact, a competitive marketplace. If you are upper middle class in particular and can pay a decent amount of money, you are wanted. And we should shop that way and ask better questions, but also vis-a-vis, Jeff's anonymous admissions officer at, midnight trying to face down another 60 applications. With that entitlement should come an extremely strong sense of empathy. These admissions officers have hard jobs. They travel a lot. They stay in sort of crappy hotels. It's not paid particularly well unless you kind of shoot the moon and get to the highest level of the profession. And on the financial aid side, remember that the people that you're asking for more money or more money than you got might well make less money than you do. Just assume they do, and approach the process, with a level of humility, even as you advocate for yourself. Uh, we need to be, there needs to be more humanity in this process, and it really is all the way around.
What a compassionate, informative hour. You'll want to pick up this book. You'll want to pick up this book. You'll want to pick up this book. And if you just haven't had enough, on April 26th, Denise has invited you all to come in person to New Trier if you're in the area to hear Jeff in person, continue the conversation. I thank you all so much again for the gift of your wisdom, your time. We thank you so much. This is usually where we go hug the kids. Thank you so much, everyone. See you next
Thanks,
time.
y'all.
Thank you, everybody.
Outstanding.